Hello YouTube, this is Goddard Radio Moscow here again with another beer review for you today. As I mentioned in my last video, I'm in Heidelberg in Baden-Württemberg in Germany. I'm here until the very start of May 2014, so a lot of German beer reviews for you to come over the next little while. We've got 4 breweries that are fairly local to us here in Heidelberg, so there will be some more Heidelberg beer for you over the next few videos as well. But today I actually have one of the beers which is from one of the biggest breweries, if not the biggest brewery actually, in Stuttgart, which is just about an hour south of Heidelberg, of course. I'm actually quite well located in Germany. Heidelberg is pretty much right in the middle of Frankfurt and Stuttgart, so I've got a big selection of beer that I can pick up and do for these videos. But this one is one that actually comes quite highly recommended from my friends in Germany who actually quite like this brewery. And as I mentioned, I think it is the biggest brewery in Stuttgart. So this is the Dinkelacker-Schwaben Bräu, das Echte, and this actually just means the genuine or the real, if you like. And this one is a Schwabian style Märzen, one of my favourite styles of beer, of course, the Märzen. But as is usual with my beer reviews, I've researched the history of this one for you. This is quite interesting because basically it's a sort of group of breweries. This is the Dinkelacker-Schwaben Bräu. It's a big group of breweries that have kind of merged together over various points in history, and I'll just take you through that just now. But as I always say, if you are simply just interested in the tasting of this beer, then feel free to go on towards the latter part of the video and you will catch that particular segment. But as I mentioned though, the history of this brewery is a number of breweries basically conglomerating together and taking in a lot of small breweries, so it's got a very diverse range, this brewery, of course. But the first brewery that is relevant to the history of this beer is that of Ernst Emanuel Smudge, who founded his eponymous brewery in 1861. Now, if we move on a little bit to 1878, Robert Licht laid the foundation stone for the Schwaben Bräu brewery in the Walchingen district in Stuttgart, of course. Now, if we move on to 1888, Karl Dinkelacker established the Dinkelacker brewery, which remains at the same location in Stuttgart today. Now, in 1897, Schwaben Bräu became the first beer to be delivered by motor car, and this was actually the first beer that was delivered by motor car in Germany, and the actual car itself was from the house of Gottlieb Daimler. And I believe the Daimler company are actually now part of Mercedes, but I might be wrong with that. I'm not so into my cars myself, actually. But in 1900, Karl Dinkelacker brewed the famous Pils that's now well established as a favourite in Stuttgart, and you can see the advertisements for these all throughout the city, actually. So if you go to Stuttgart, of course, you'll see CD Pils, and this is the famous Pils that comes from the Dinkelacker brewery, of course, CD obviously being Karl Dinkelacker. Now, if we go to 1903, another brewery that was actually associated with the Dinkelacker-Schwaben Bräu brewery was born, and that was that of David Sandvald, and this specialised in the brewing of wheat beer. And that same year, Schwaben Bräu was actually bottled using one of the first automatic bottling machines. So as you can see, this brewery's been involved in a sort of quite a few pioneering ways, if you like, throughout Germany, even with the beer brewing process and of course with other sort of advances in science and technology there. So in 1971, Dinkelacker bought over the long established Smudge brewery, and then in 1978, Dinkelacker also acquired the Sandvald brewery. So this is where you're starting to see the merger of these breweries together and where the brewery group comes from. But the merged breweries continued to grow over the next few years, and then in 1988 they were able to celebrate with VfB Stuttgart as their sponsor, of course, with them winning the Bundesliga Championship. Now, in 1996, this saw the merger of the Dinkelacker brewery and Schwaben Bräu breweries, and at this time they were considered as two of the major traditional Stuttgart breweries. But the brewery was actually owned for a period by InBev, but in 2007, Wolfgang Dinkelacker, who I believe was the great-grandson of Karl Dinkelacker, he bought over the brewery and returned it to independence, obviously, and this is what you want. You want independent breweries rather than sort of conglomerate breweries. But today the brewery has over 300 employees, and apparently, as I said before, it's the biggest brewery in Stuttgart, and it's actually one of the largest group independent breweries in Baden-Württemberg as well, apparently. That, of course, being the state in Germany where Stuttgart is located. But actually, just to give you a little summary of that there, because I realise these sort of mergers and things can be a little bit confusing, the actual history of the mergers and the creation of this brewery group was that Dinkelacker brought the Smudge brewery and also Sandvald, and then Dinkelacker and Schwaben Bräu later merged. So this is where you get the brewery group coming from there. I thought when I was making the notes for this that would be a little good summary for you there. But just to tell you a little bit about the different beers that are available from the Dinkelacker-Schwaben Bräu brewery. Obviously they have many different ranges, and that's one of the things that's quite cool about this, is that they've sort of kept all the beers in their own brand. They've not rebranded them when all these mergers have got on. So Dinkelacker, from the Dinkelacker brewery, you can get the Helles Pils, a dark, Märzen, Privat, Volksfest beer, Weihnachtsfest beer, Golden Lager, and they also had a 125th anniversary beer quite recently. If you go to the Schwaben Bräu, which is this brand of course, they have the Das Echte, which is the Märzen style beer, Das Schwarz, which is a Schwarz beer, Das Naturtrüb, which is a Keller beer, an unfiltered beer, of course, quite a common term in Germany, of course, that for the beer. They have Das Helle, which is a sort of Bavarian Munich style lager, of course, a very nice style of beer actually. They have the Hellerbock, Meisterpils, and they also have the Meisterweissen. You can get these in the Hell and the Dunkel varieties. They have Original Pils, Volksfest beer, and also a Weihnachtsfest beer as well. And if you actually move on to the sort of smaller brands in the brewery, you have the Sandwald one, and they have an Export, a Hefeweizen, Crystal Hefeweizen, Dunkelweizen, a Radler Cola beer, and they've also got various light beers as well. Then the other ones are all a lot smaller than this. They've got another 3 or 4 brands here. They've got the Brauchle, which do an Export and a Hefeweizen beer, Smooch, which is a Wille beer. This is actually quite a popular beer, and I have one of these to review for you at a later date. There's also Klus, who do a Keller Pils, and an Export, and there's also Heigerlocher, Siegel Monastery, and they do a Hefeweizen. You can get a Dunkel, a Helle, or a Crystal Hefeweizen, and they also have Pils, Landbier, and Spezial. So that's the big sort of list of beers that this brewery do here. So as you can see, it is the biggest brewery in Stuttgart, and obviously it's quite cool because they've kept all these different beers in their own brands. I mean, many breweries, when they sort of merge together, if you like, they'll just simply rebrand the old beer and make it the sort of the brewery that buys over the smaller brewery. They just put their name on the bottle. So it's really cool that they've actually sort of kept the tradition of the old breweries, and they're quite proud of that. And it's one thing that is actually quite cool when it comes to Germans and their beer. They're very traditional, and that's why the Reinheitsgebot has stayed in place for quite a number of years in Germany, of course. So let's just have a little look and get on to the tasting of this beer itself. Of course, I'll just bring up the camera, let you have a little look at the label. As you can see there, sort of a German man with his wife, I guess, sort of having a good time with a big tankard of beer. Das Echte, as I mentioned, just means the sort of the real, or the original. I'm not really original, more the real or the genuine, if you like. That's kind of what the word means. It's just, I think this beer on the front, it basically says a beer we had in the good old times, I guess. That's what the sort of thing at the bottom here means. And as you can see, Das Echte Schwaben Bräu Märzen, a Schwabian Märzen beer, of course. There's the little top of the thing here, and you can see Schwaben, this sort of Schwaben Bräu symbol on this one. This one actually, as I mentioned in the last video, some of these pop tops have a little engraving and things on them there. So this one's got a sort of barrel, if you like, with different kind of kitchen implements or brewing implements, I guess. So it's quite cool in that way. I don't know how well you can see that there. I think that's upside down actually. I'll just turn it around like this. You can see the barrel that has the little sort of kitchen implements in it there. But let's get this guy open and actually get on with the tasting. This one, of course, is a 5.5% Märzen beer, but it's also described, when I've looked this up, it's also described as an Oktoberfest beer. So I'm not sure exactly how this one's going to be, but we'll get it open and we'll see how we get on here. As I mentioned, a 5.5% beer. So let's get this guy out and get on with the tasting. And I like to see how big a bang these things make whenever I have them. Not a bad one actually. As you can see, a nice bit of smoky open in there. Let's just get this guy out and into the glass. It's very light compared to what I would have thought a Märzen style beer would be, of course. Nice bit of head coming up on that one here. There is just a little bit of stuff left in the bottle. I'll see if I can get the rest of that out, which I'm going to be able to do. As is German tradition, we'll close up the top. Here we are, get that closed up for you there and sit the beer down. But as you can see, this is a hell of a lot lighter than I was expecting from a Märzen beer. Maybe it is more of an October style fest beer. That head is actually quite lumpy, and that's going to fade away and not going to retain very well actually. As you can see, it's crystal clear. It's actually a sort of kind of, it's a deep golden colour actually, maybe a little bit of a copper tint to it actually. It's very unusual appearance for a Märzen, as I say, but this one hopefully should be quite an interesting beer. In terms of the aroma, picking up, it's actually quite a sweet smelling beer actually. It's quite malty, and you can smell a good bit of the earthy character and herbal hops here, and you can pick up a lot of cereal malt actually. Yes, it's quite grassy actually, and you're picking up some yeast as well. You can see the head has just gone completely from this one. I don't think the Germans would like that very much. So the Germans love their beers to have a big sort of head that kind of comes out in a little hill over the glass here. There's a good bit of carbonation visible in this one, so I'm not sure how smooth this one will be. As I say, one of the trademarks with German beer is just how smooth it is. But in terms of the aroma here, it's quite malty smelling. You've got a good bit of earthy and herbal character from the hops here, but you can pick up a lot of cereal malts as well, and there's a good bit of sort of grassy character and some nice yeast in there as well. It smells like quite a nice beer, but it's quite a mild smell. You really have to kind of sort of breathe it in to get more of these aromas here. But a very mild smelling beer, but I'm definitely getting those sort of characteristics from it. But let's give this guy a taste and see how we get on here. It's actually a very sweet beer. Wasn't what I was expecting. As I say, very unusual for a Märzen style beer, of course. But yeah, there's a lot of kind of caramel and brown sugar flavours in there from the malts, obviously. But it's got an underlying little bit of roasted character as well, I would say. Not so prominent, but quite nicely done. But yeah, in the middle, those caramel, brown sugary flavours, they're not too dark actually, but they're mixing very well with the sort of bready and kind of yeasty flavours in the middle of the beer, as you would expect. But I'm picking up the sort of grassy feel to this one as well that you can get in the aroma. I'm not getting so much the kind of herbal character that I could pick up with the hops in the aroma here. It's a very sort of bready and kind of sweet style beer. It's more of a malty beer than a hoppy beer, this one. But yeah, it has that nice little bit of grassy character in there that comes on in the end, but it's mainly a sweet, bready, caramel, malty beer. It's actually got quite a long and a little bit of a bitter finish on the end there, but this is a really... I actually quite like this one. I like beers that are big and bready, and it's quite a characteristic of some German styles of beer, of course. But yeah, on the finish, it does have quite a bit of a bitter finish that kind of sticks with it actually. It's quite nice, and I do quite, as I say, I do like these sort of nice and bready caramel flavoured beers. In terms of the body here on this one, or the mouthfeel if you like, I would say this is mid-bodied. It's got a nice moderate carbonation. It's not quite as smooth as some German beers that I've had before. Usually German beers are very kind of lowly carbonated. This one is a little bit more than that. It's not quite as smooth. It's more of an oily mouthfeel, this one, I would say. But it does have a little bit of that typical German smoothness, but as I say, not quite as smooth as some of the German beers I've had. But yeah, like overall, in terms of this beer, I've drunk a fair little bit of it now. I like it because it's got that nice caramel and bready feel in the middle of it, and it just has this sort of nice sort of grassy hops to balance that out a little bit, and it has got a nice little bit of a bitter finish, but it's overridingly, it's a caramel bready beer. Overall it's quite nice, but it's definitely not what I would expect of a Märzen or even an Oktoberfest beer. I think to me it strikes me as maybe being more of a sort of maybe a land beer or something like that, this sort of German style there. So, but it does say on the bottle there it's a beer that they've had in the old times, so I'm guessing it's a very old style beer, but I don't know why they've labelled it as a Märzen beer in that sense, because Märzens are very sort of dark beers usually, but it's a nice beer anyway. I mean, if you're in the Stuttgart area of Germany, you'll probably see these. Give it a try and see what you think. If you're into the sort of bready and caramelly flavoured beers, this is probably one for you to go for. It's got a little bit of a different kind of mouthfeel, as I say, that you would expect from sort of German beers. It's not quite as smooth, but it's a really kind of nice and refreshing beer. It's quite an easy drinking one, so if you're into that sort of thing, give it a try. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this beer review. I've enjoyed doing another German beer review for you. I've got more beers from this Dinkelacker-Schwaben Bräu brewery, of course, and I'll try and get some of the more sort of obscure ones that are from the range of this brewery as well. It should be quite an interesting thing to see how all their different range varies in that sense. But thanks again for watching my beer reviews. If you have tried this beer yourself, please let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on it, or indeed anything from this brewery, of course. I'm always open to recommendations for beer as well, so feel free to comment away and do what you want. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing, and I'll catch you soon with another beer review. Thanks again for your support. Cheers.